So, good morning. I'm tasked to talk about the pathophysiology of exudative and transudative pleural effusion. So, first, I would like to talk about exudative pleural effusion. As it has been mentioned earlier, exudative pleural effusion is mainly caused by an underlying lung disease, meaning there might be an inflammation going on in the lungs. And by inflammation, this means the pleural fluid inside the lungs does not only contain fluid itself or water, it also contains um, pro-inflammatory cells, which are cells that fights causative agents that causes inflammation to the lungs. So aside from that, proteins such as albumin also is a part of the pleural fluid. With this, as it has been mentioned earlier, exudative pleural effusion might be caused by inflammation, and also, as I have read the EGANs, it is also mentioned there that these protein contents of exudative pleural effusion may cause yung accumulation of fluid. But first, I'd like to talk about muna the pathway of how inflammation causes pleural effusion. So, if there is a presence of inflammation, it increases interstitial fluid because if the lungs is inflamed, a lot of fluids, debris, or other contents pulls in the lungs, and because of this, the interstitium of the lungs will be flooded, which now will, if there is an increase in accumulation, it may rupture the um, thin membrane of the lungs, which is what we call as the visceral pleura. And once this thin membrane gets ruptured, the fluid that accumulates in the interstitium of the lungs will leak to the pleural space, causing now pleural effusion. So, in here we can see that the fluid accumulation in the pleural space originated from an inflammation or a disease process that happened in the lungs. And aside from inflammation, exudative pleural effusion may also occur due to an increase in protein content of the pleural fluid. How and why? Because if there is protein in the pleural fluid, it causes the fibrin or small particles such as proteins like albumin. Um, it causes these particles to spread towards the whole parietal and visceral pleura, which covers the lungs and the thorax. These small particles would what you call this occlude or prevent the normal drainage of fluid out of the lungs. As it has been also mentioned earlier, in the movement of water or fluid in the lungs, there we also have lymphatic system in the lungs which drains the fluid accumulating in the lungs. But because of this increase in protein content, these proteins and fibrins say if the lungs accumulates pleural fluid due, due to a disease process, it will excuse me, it will spread towards the whole visceral and parietal pleura, which will now cause a blocked or baradong drainage system of the lungs. And because of this blockage, it will not allow the normal draining of these pleural fluids out of the lungs. So if we will sum it up, in the presence of inflammation, pleural fluid also increases. And if there is also an increase in protein content in this pleural fluid, it will cause a blockage to the drainage system, which will now result to a decreased drainage and increased accumulation of fluid. and the net result would be a pleural effusion.